question is, I believe, Gus Turney regarding jobs.
Oh,
No?
over here? Are you Gus? I thought I saw a hand go up.
Last name is Turney, no? Okay, we'll move on. Kevin Verville had a question regarding the budget.
Thank you for coming tonight,
Hey, Kevin.
Congressman.
Good to see you.
I have to admit, I make it no secret to the crowd, I'm a fiscal conservative, and I don't agree with the vote.
I saw your Facebook post on my ad, on my Facebook, so I am well aware. I actually read them.
The problem I have,
Yeah.
and I think you're wrong, that next year's budget won't be a penny smaller than this year's budget. And the year after that won't be a penny smaller than next year. And that all we've cut is the rate of growth. And what we really need is true spending. Baseline budgeting has got to end to be able to bring the debt under control. The country is going absolutely bankrupt. So I would strongly encourage you, when you go back to Washington, to do everything you possibly can to bring us real spending cuts, not cuts in baseline budgeting, not cuts in the rate of growth of government, but in the size and scope of the federal government, and to get the debt paid off.
Well, I'm glad you made that statement. I agree with your statement wholeheartedly. So there's two components of our federal budget. Our federal budget, federal government, by the way, works very differently than your personal budget, your business budget, the town of Hooksett's budget, Manchester's budget, or the state of New Hampshire. Washington does work very differently. Now, that doesn't mean that we have to adjust to how Washington works. What it means is we've got to change the way Washington works. So there's two or three. I'm on the budget committee. There is one thing that we can do that will fundamentally change who's in power, who has the power, and budget controls, and that's going to a biennial budget. Now let me tell you why. If you have a 2-year budget that is authorized, and you fight for that authorization in year 1, and in year 2, every member of Congress, like maybe a Board of Selectmen, or a Board of Aldermen, or a legislative body, is then responsible for the oversight of that spending. And it would be, if you're on Homeland Security, then you're responsible for the oversight of that spending. And if they're not doing their job, you have the right and the responsibility to pull that funding back. Washington doesn't work that way. Right now, the way it works, I'm what's called an authorizer. I'm on also transportation infrastructure. I quote authorize money. There's an appropriator down the hall who gets to decide when that money is spent, where it's spent, and who gets it. That's wrong. That means that person over there has a lot more power than I do. Now, it's not about individual power. It's supposed to be about the people's money and how we spend and manage the people's money. Now, you remember my days as mayor? I was tough. I was tough when it came to other people's money because my belief, my personal belief, is that I'm supposed to be a good steward of your money. Now, I don't think Washington is a good steward of our money right now. And I do think that it needs to be changed. What I can tell you after being there for 7 months, it's the biggest ship in the world. And if you want to change it, we've got to continue to be focused on putting people in office who will do the necessary spending cuts. I tried $100 billion a month, couldn't get any takers. We couldn't get $100 billion over 6 months. So on the budget committee, I crafted a $6.2 trillion cut over 10 years. And you know what? I'm getting lambasted for it. But it's the right thing to do because we have to get back to balance. This particular agreement cuts, again, discretionary versus mandatory. I know we don't like these terms, but I'll tell you what they mean. Discretionary is what I refer to as the operating budget. Any federal agency, any grant that is proposed, any agency that spends any money, whether on an individual or for a program, is discretionary. That is authorized each and every year. And on the other side, you have mandatory. Mandatory is anything codified in law. which are, guess what, the three entitlements, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security. That is on autopilot. I cannot change the direction of mandatory unless there is an act of both houses and the president. So when you say that spending is going up every year, technically you're right. So what we focused on is what we have authority over. We actually did cut in the discretionary side, spending. And it's actually going to go down. Went down this year, it's going to go down next year. But the other mandatory spending, which is at a growth rate of about 8% a year, eats up the cuts that we made. And it'll continue the overall size of the budget to grow. So until we get under control and some sort of agreement on entitlement reform, we are not going to see that deficit close. And that is the big component of the budget. Now, how many of you seen the commercials on TV since the House budget was adopted, of that individual pushing grandmother in a wheelchair over a cliff? I mean, you know, that's what politics has been reduced to in this country. And because of that, people are afraid to do the right thing. Well, I was in the Budget Committee. I negotiated and debated these particular issues. I came forth and voted for a budget that, in my view, doesn't push Granny off the cliff. It saves $6.2 trillion over 10 years. Those are real, those are real, in mandatory and discretionary. And the way it does it is not by eliminating Medicare and Medicaid, as our commercials would suggest, but preserving them and modifying for people like me. Not anyone who's 55 and older. If you're 55 and older in this room, let me tell you, the proposal that passed the House for Medicare doesn't change a thing for you. Not one thing. Not one thing. But for someone like me who's 40, I still get Medicare. I get, when I'm 64, a big book in the mail, like I did when I was a member of Congress, from the federal government saying, pick and choose what health insurance you want. I get to pick and choose, like I do as a member of Congress. I send it back to the federal government, and the federal government sends to the provider a check up to $15,000. Now, if I choose to go over that, then I have to pay. That, in and of itself, that change, brings spending in Medicare from 8% to 2% a year. Now, there's three other things that everybody should know in this discussion. There's 10,000 baby boomers per day who are coming on Medicare. Per day. We have 35 million people on Medicare. It doubles in 10 years. So when you just look at that spreadsheet, I think most people would agree, it's not sustainable. You can't pay for it. The second thing that most people don't realize is that not only the CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, but the trustees of Medicare issued a report in May that said if Congress does not act, Medicare goes bankrupt. These are not Republicans, these are not Democrats, these are nonpartisan organizations. Testify before Congress. So when I come back home and I talk to people, I say, do you want us to let it go bankrupt? Or would you prefer us to try to solve the problem and make sure that it's preserved and protected? And when people have the facts, they overwhelmingly say, fix it. Don't let it go bankrupt. But I will tell you this, the plan that passed the House does not affect anybody who is over 55. Your benefits don't change one bit. And I have this nice, funny discussion with some of my colleagues on the Budget Committee from the other side of the aisle who admit to me it's a great talking point. And it got them the election in New York. But is this about elections, or is it about saving the country? Because in my view, this is about a serious problem that the country is having. And we need serious leadership and serious people being honest with each and every one of you who are going to bring their best judgment, not their political judgment, but their best judgment to Washington and make the best and most informed decisions about how to get through this mess. And I'll tell you, it's not going to be pretty. We're still going to have these battles and these different debates because there are a lot of different and varying views on how to get there. But my way is a more limited government, reduce our spending, be reasonable and honest about the programs that are duplicative or that we can't afford, and get there over time.
Okay, thank you, Congressman.